My uncle worked for the US Forest Service for 22 years. He retired in 1991 and never once talked about what he did for work. Not at dinner, not at holidays, not to my father, who asked him directly more than once. The night he died, in a hospital room in Santa Fe, New Mexico, he asked everyone else to leave. He told me one thing. He said there is a canyon in the Jemez Mountains that the Forest Service sealed in 1949. He said the official reason they gave the public was erosion control. He said that was not why they sealed it. He said I should never go there. He said whatever the survey team found in the lower passage in August of 1949 was still there. And then he closed his eyes. And that was the last thing he ever said to me. I want you to understand something. I have been doing this long enough to recognize when a story is being managed. I filed 14 FOIA requests to build this video. 9 were denied, 3 came back partially redacted, meaning entire pages were blacked out before they reached me. 2 came back with the response that the records either do not exist or are exempt from disclosure under Title V, United States Code, Section 5.52, Exemption 7. That is the law enforcement exemption. It applies to records that could reasonably be expected to interfere with enforcement proceedings or disclose the identity of a confidential source. I want you to sit with that. The closure of a hiking trail in a national forest in New Mexico, exempt under the law enforcement provision. Someone made a decision that you do not get to know why this canyon was sealed. I'm going to tell you what the record shows. I am not going to tell you what to think. The Jemez Mountains sit in north-central New Mexico, roughly 55 miles northwest of Santa Fe. The range rises from the Rio Grande Valley to peaks above 11,000 feet. The Santa Fe National Forest manages 1.6 million acres of federal land in this region. Their authority includes the power to close any section of federal land at any time for any reason they determine to be in the public interest. They are not required to explain that reason in detail. They are required to post a closure notice. That is all. Most Americans have never heard of the Jemez Mountains. Roughly 340,000 people visit the Santa Fe National Forest each year, well below parks like Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon. That gap matters, because it means what happened here has largely stayed here. The geology of this region has almost no equivalent anywhere in the continental United States. The Jemez Mountains sit on the Valles Caldera, a collapsed supervolcano that erupted 1.25 million years ago. That eruption was roughly 600 times the size of the 1980 Mount St. Helens event. It deposited ash across an area larger than Colorado. The caldera, a roughly 14-mile wide bowl of collapsed earth, is still classified as an active volcanic system by the USGS. Hydrothermal activity continues today. There are sections of this landscape where the ground is warm to the touch, where gases vent from fissures, where underground water runs hotter than surface conditions could explain. The Pueblo people of this region, the Tewa-speaking communities of the northern Rio Grande, have occupied this landscape for over 1,000 years. The canyon in question sits on the eastern edge of what was historically Jemez Pueblo territory. The Jemez people called this specific drainage Wabakwa, a term that translates roughly as the place the earth speaks. They did not use it for travel or hunting. The oral tradition of the Jemez Pueblo, documented by anthropologist Elsie Clues Parsons in a 1925 ethnographic survey, describes a prohibition against entering the lower section after dark. The prohibition was not religious, it was practical. The elders described it as a place where the ground was not finished, where something under the surface had not yet decided what it was. The first documented federal survey of this canyon took place in September of 1931. 4 USGS geologists entered the drainage as part of a broader hydrological mapping project. The report, which I obtained through a partial FOIA disclosure, covers 47 pages. The last 11 are redacted. The unredacted sections describe a canyon roughly 3 miles long, averaging 200 feet in depth, deeper than a 20-story building, with an unusual thermal signature. The team noted multiple locations where ground temperature exceeded ambient air temperature by more than 30 degrees Fahrenheit. They also flagged a section in the lower canyon, approximately 2.3 miles from the trailhead, where the rock walls showed evidence of recent chemical alteration. Their word, recent. In geology, that means anything within the last 10,000 years. They recommended a follow-up survey. That follow-up was never conducted. The 1931 report sat in the USGS archive for 18 years. In the summer of 1947, a 34-year-old geology graduate student named Paul Renner from the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque entered the canyon system as part of his doctoral research on Valles Caldera hydrothermal systems. He had a research permit from the Santa Fe National Forest covering the upper and middle sections of the drainage. It did not cover the lower section, the same one the 1931 USGS team had flagged in their redacted report. Renner's field notes, donated to the UNM Geology Department Library by his family in 2003, describe 6 weeks of methodical work in the Upper Canyon between June and July of 1947. Standard documentation, rock formations, temperature readings, water chemistry, until the entry dated July 14, 1947. On July 14th, Renner wrote that he had followed a secondary drainage channel, approximately 400 yards past his permitted boundary into the lower canyon. He did it because the thermal gradient he was measuring spiked at the boundary in a way that did not fit his geological model. He wanted to see if the anomaly continued. It did. His notes describe a section of canyon floor where the rock was visibly wet, not from surface water, but from condensation forming on stone that was warmer than the air around it. He noted a sound. He described it as low, rhythmic, rising from beneath the canyon floor rather than from any surface source. He wrote the following, and I am reading from the original document. The interval is consistent. Not wind, not water movement. Something periodic. I counted 11 seconds between pulses. It did not change. Renner left the canyon and returned to camp. His notes for the next 2 days describe him debating whether to report what he found or attribute it to a process he had not yet identified. On the third day, he went back in to take instrument readings. The official record states that Paul Renner fell on a section of loose scree in the Upper Canyon on July 17, 1947, and sustained injuries requiring medical evacuation. That is the official record, but the official record has a problem, as the injury report from the Jemez Springs Ranger Station lists Renner's injuries as a fractured left wrist and contusions to the upper torso. Real injuries, but Renner's field notes, written in his own hand, contain a final entry dated July 17, 1947. It reads, I did not fall. Something in the lower passage was moving along the west wall. I ran. I did not fall. I need to contact the USGS office in Albuquerque before I write anything more official than this. That is the last entry in the notebook. The paperwork says one thing. The man who was there said something very different. Renner did contact the USGS Albuquerque office. I know this because I found a reference to a meeting between Renner and USGS district geologist Howard Calloway in the USGS Correspondence Archive, dated August 3, 1947. The record of that meeting is 3 sentences long. P. Renner, UNM graduate researcher, discussed anomalous findings in Jemez Drainage Survey area. Matter referred to Forest Service Regional Office, Santa Fe. No further action required at district level. No description of what Renner said. No record of what the Forest Service did with the referral. 2 years later, on March 4, 1949, the US Forest Service issued Closure Order 49 NM07 for the lower 1.8 miles of the Wabakwa Drainage. The stated reason: soil erosion remediation and trail instability. The closure was designated permanent. No re-evaluation date was specified. No engineering survey was cited. The order references no prior incident, no safety assessment, no public comment period. The official reason was soil erosion. I have tried to explain this away, and I cannot. Permanent closure orders in the Forest Service system require an assessment, a documented basis. Closure Order 49 NM07 has none of that in its public-facing record. What it has is a signature from the Regional Forester's Office in Albuquerque, and a single line of justification that would not pass a standard administrative review. I have been doing this long enough to recognize when a story is being managed. This closure order was written to be filed and forgotten. But Paul Renner and Closure Order 49 NM07 are not the reason this canyon is still sealed in 2025. What a Forest Service survey team found in August of 1949, 5 months after the closure order was signed, is. And what they chose to do with that information is the part of this story that I keep coming back to. In August of 1949, a 6-person Forest Service team entered the Lower Canyon to conduct a closure verification survey. Standard practice after a permanent closure order: document conditions, mark boundaries, install physical barriers. The team lead was a 41-year-old district ranger named Robert Alcott from the Jemez Springs Ranger Station, 2 seasonal employees, a Forest Service engineer, and 2 additional staff whose names are redacted in the document I was able to obtain. The team was in the Lower Canyon for approximately 9 hours. The closure verification report they filed on August 19, 1949, available in the Santa Fe National Forest Historical Archive, covers 11 pages. The first 9 describe standard surveying work. The final 2 pages are missing. They are not redacted. They are simply not there. The document shows a clean break between page 9 and what should be page 10. Someone removed them. I do not know when. I do not know who. What I do know is this. Robert Alcott resigned from the U.S. Forest Service on September 2, 1949, 14 days after filing that report. He had been with the agency for 16 years. His personnel file lists his reason as personal reasons. No exit interview, no transfer. He stopped working for the federal government 16 years in, 14 days after going into that canyon. I tracked Alcott through New Mexico state records and newspaper archives. He moved to Taos in October of 1949, about 70 miles from the canyon. He worked as a hardware store clerk for the rest of his working life. He died in Taos in 1978. His obituary in the Taos News is 11 lines long. It mentions his church membership. It does not mention 16 years with the U.S. Forest Service. I want you to think about what that is. A man builds a career for 16 years. He goes into a canyon on a routine survey. 2 weeks later, he walks away from everything and never says why for the rest of his life. I found one person who remembered Alcott in Taos, a woman named Dorothy Salazar, whose family owned the hardware store where he worked, provided a written statement to a local historical project in 2009. She was 9 years old when Alcott started working for her father. She described him as quiet, reliable, and deeply uncomfortable with any mention of the Jemez Mountains. She wrote, "My father once asked Mr. Alcott directly if he had ever worked in the mountains. It was just conversation. Mr. Alcott put down what he was carrying and went home for the day. He did not explain. My father never brought it up again. What the Forest Service found in that lower canyon in August of 1949 is in 2 pages of a report that no longer exists. What a 16-year federal employee did after seeing it was leave and never speak of it again. Let me tell you what a Jemez Pueblo elder named Martin Toya, 67 years old, a former tribal council member from Jemez Pueblo, New Mexico, told me in a recorded conversation in March of 2024. Toya gave me permission to use his name and his words. Toya told me that the oral tradition of the Jemez people regarding the Lower Canyon describes what lives in that section of the earth as neither living nor dead by the definitions the Pueblo people use for those terms. It is not a spirit. It is not an ancestor. It is something the Jemez people have always known was there and have always known was not theirs to disturb. His grandfather, who was a young man when the Forest Service sealed the canyon, said the federal government made the right decision for the wrong reason. They sealed it because they were afraid. They should have sealed it because it was owed that silence. I want you to sit with that. The Jemez Pueblo have lived above this canyon for over 1,000 years. They have a specific name for it. They have a prohibition against entering the lower section that predates any federal land management designation by at least 8 centuries. When the federal government sealed it in 1949, a Jemez elder said they got the outcome right and had no idea why. The paperwork says erosion. The people who have lived here for 1,000 years say something else. The man who went in and came out 14 days before he quit his 16-year career said nothing at all for the rest of his life. I want to go back to something Toya said. He said the thing in the Lower Canyon was neither living nor dead by Pueblo definitions. At the time, I wrote it down and moved on. By the time I finished building this story, I understood what he meant, and by the end of this video, you will too. In 1971, a 29-year-old environmental engineer named Carol Whitfield, working as a contractor for the EPA's Region 6 office in Dallas, Texas, was assigned to a routine water quality assessment of the Rio Guadalupe watershed in Sandoval County, New Mexico. Her assignment included sampling from multiple tributary drainages. One of those tributaries ran through the sealed section of the Wabakwa Canyon. The EPA's authority to access Forest Service land for environmental assessment is established under the Clean Water Act and is not subject to Forest Service closure orders. Whitfield had a federal access warrant. She went in. Whitfield filed her report in February of 1972. Most of it is standard EPA documentation. The section covering the Wabakwa tributary contains an anomaly I have not been able to explain. The water samples from the lower canyon show thermal elevation, temperature approximately 14 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the ambient model predicted for that elevation at that time of year. In an active hydrothermal zone, that alone is not unusual. What Whitfield also documented is this. Her field log notes that samples from the lowest collection point, 1.9 miles into the sealed section, showed biological activity inconsistent with known thermophilic organisms at that thermal range. She was not a biologist. She flagged it as an anomaly requiring specialist follow-up. She submitted it. The EPA Region 6 office logged it. Then the EPA contacted the Santa Fe National Forest Regional Office on March 14, 1972 to request a cooperative biological survey. The Forest Service responded in writing on March 28th. That letter is in the EPA archive. It is one paragraph. It states that the drainage is under permanent closure, Order 49 NM07, and that any follow-up survey would require approval from the Forest Service Washington office. It states that such approval is not anticipated to be forthcoming. It does not explain why. The EPA did not pursue it further. The anomalous biological activity Whitfield documented in 1972 was never followed up. It is still in the EPA archive. It has never appeared in any public-facing document. I found it by cross-referencing EPA Region 6 water quality records with the Forest Service Sandoval County closure file. Neither agency pointed me to the connection. I made it myself. In the summer of 1989, a 44-year-old freelance writer named James Morales from Albuquerque was researching a feature on federal land closures in the Southwest. He had found closure order 49 NM07. He had found the 1931 USGS Survey. He had filed his own FOIA requests. He had spoken to Jemez Pueblo community members. He had even located one of the two redacted names from the 1949 survey team, a seasonal Forest Service employee still alive and living in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. That man, whose name I am not using because his family asked me not to, was 68 years old in 1989. He agreed to speak to Morales on condition of anonymity. Morales' research notes, which his daughter shared with me after James Morales died in 2018, record what the man said. He had been in the lower canyon on August 12, 1949. At approximately 200 feet past the point where the canyon floor drops about 10 feet, the team found a section of the west wall where the rock had been altered. Not by erosion, not by water. He said it looked like something had pressed against the rock from inside. Alcott told everyone to document it and keep moving. They kept moving. About 400 yards further in, near the lowest point of the drainage, they found a fissure in the canyon floor, approximately 2 feet wide, running about 30 feet along the drainage axis. Warm air was moving upward through it. The sound from Renner's notes, low, rhythmic, 11-second intervals, was coming from below the fissure. He could hear it clearly. Alcott looked at it for approximately 3 minutes without speaking. Then he told the team to exit immediately. They left without installing the final boundary markers or completing the survey. The report they filed said the markers were installed and the survey was complete. That is on the record. A federal survey team filed a falsified completion report. They documented work they did not do because the team lead told them to leave before it was finished. And that team lead resigned 14 days later. The official reason for the closure of the lower Wabakwa drainage is erosion control. That is still the official reason today. The official record has not been revised, not after Renner's field notes, not after Whitfield's water chemistry anomaly, not after 40 years of FOIA requests. The answer is always the same. Erosion control. Files do not exist. Documents are exempt. I have tried to explain this away. I cannot. What the record shows is this. The Lower Canyon was first documented as anomalous in 1931. A graduate researcher entered it in 1947 and left a note saying he did not fall, that something in the lower passage was moving. It was sealed in 1949. A survey team went in that August, found altered rock and a fissure with rhythmic low-frequency sound, and left without finishing. The team lead resigned 2 weeks later. An EPA contractor documented anomalous biological activity in the drainage water in 1972, and a follow-up was blocked by the Forest Service with a single sentence. In 1989, an eyewitness from the 1949 team confirmed what had been found. His name is not in any public record. Every layer of this story has the same structure. Someone sees something. The official record describes something different. The subject is closed. As of June 2025, the lower 1.8 miles of the Wabakwa Drainage remains under closure order 49 NM in 07. The closure has been continuously in effect for 76 years. It is still listed in the Forest Service's current land management plan as a permanent restricted area. The stated reason is still erosion control and trail instability. The 11 FOIA requests filed regarding this location since 2001 have returned 4 denials, 4 responses citing non-existent records, and 3 partial disclosures with redacted sections. None has ever cited the 1949 survey team's report. None has acknowledged the EPA's 1972 anomaly. None has referenced the 1931 USGS Survey's missing final 11 pages. The Forest Service Washington office has not revised its official position since 1949. Toya told me that the Jemez Pueblo Tribal Council submitted a formal request to the Forest Service in 2019 for a joint consultation on the Wabakwa closure under the National Historic Preservation Act. The Forest Service acknowledged the request and said it would initiate a review process. That was 2019. As of this recording, that process has produced no public documentation, no findings, and no change to the closure order. Still pending. 6 years. There are still people who hike in this area. The trails adjacent to the closure boundary are still open. The closure sign on the east side of the drainage was last replaced in March of 2021. Someone put a new sign there. Someone maintains that boundary. Someone still thinks it matters that you do not go in there. I keep thinking about Robert Alcott standing at the edge of that fissure on August 12, 1949, looking down into warm, moving air for 3 minutes without speaking, and then turning to his team and telling them to leave. I keep thinking about Paul Renner writing "I did not fall. I need to contact the USGS office before I write anything more official than this," and then never writing anything official at all. I keep thinking about the sound. Low, rhythmic, 11 seconds between pulses. First documented in July of 1947, still there, by the eyewitness account from 1989, still there, presumably, today. In a canyon the federal government has kept sealed for 76 years under a reason that does not hold up to basic administrative scrutiny. I keep thinking about what Toya said, that the Jemez people have known what is in the lower drainage for longer than any federal agency has existed to manage it. 2. That they sealed it with silence long before anyone filed a closure order, that the federal government got the outcome right and had no idea why. Whatever is in the lower section of the Wabakwa Canyon does not file reports, it does not respond to FOIA requests, it does not revise its official position. The Jemez people have been aware of it for over 1,000 years. The rock around it has been warm for longer than human memory goes back. The 1931 survey noted it. The 1947 field notes noted it. The 1949 team found it, left without finishing, and the man who led them in resigned 2 weeks later and moved to Taos and never said why for the rest of his life. Something in the Jemez Mountains has been patient for a very long time, longer than the Santa Fe National Forest, longer than the state of New Mexico, longer than anyone who has ever been assigned to manage it. Whatever is in the Lower Canyon has been there since before this country existed, before the agency that claims to regulate it existed, before any of the documents I spent 3 months reading were written. It is patient. It does not need the files to be released. It does not need anyone to say why. It is still there. Subscribe so the next one finds you. Comment the word sealed below so I know who made it to the end.